Hey everyone! Now that things have died down a bit, I can finally give my take on that one Harry Potter game everyone was so involved with a couple months ago. You know, it's kinda mid, but I don't see why people are upset about... Okay then, yeah, that's a little weird. Let's back away slowly. April Fools! I'm not touching Hogwarts Legacy with a 50-foot pole. I've seen what goes on at Twitter, and I'm not taking that heat for what's essentially games as a service Avengers for people that got a lightning bolt tattoo. But it 'tis the season, so we need to do something goofy. Something that otherwise we wouldn't take seriously no matter how well I present it. And I've got just the thing. Let's determine if Metal Gear Solid 5 is an immersive sim or not. This is one of the single most annoying questions I get, mainly brought on by that one infographic that keeps on getting posted on Reddit and other places where people will post anything for dopamine points without scrutinizing what they're actually linking to. But if I just say no, then people will get all indignant like they do whenever someone tries to say Stalker or Fallout New Vegas is an immersive sim and just go, "Nuh-uh, you're wrong because I said so. My favorite thing is totally an immersive sim." So instead, we're devoting time today to going through part by part and giving an honest to God answer to that question. We will look at the superficial elements of an immersive sim, the gameplay features of an immersive sim, and the design philosophy of an immersive sim. Directly compare that to what we see and what we get in Metal Gear Solid 5 and determine whether or not the Phantom Pain is an immersive sim. Why? Because frankly, I'm sick of this kind of questioning, and if it's one thing I can do for an April Fool's joke, it is committing to the bit. Don't you even dare think about clicking away from this video. God has already judged you for opening it. You're stuck on this ride with me. Okay, so before we really get into this, we should set the groundwork by talking about my initial experiences with the game and Metal Gear as a whole. For the sake of transparency, I've never properly completed a Metal Gear game, but I have played some of Snake Eater, the original Metal Gear Solid, which I'm still working through on my old PlayStation I got, but I'm trying to find the time. And I did get to play the original Metal Gear at my grandma's house on an old NES, but I wasn't even able to read back then because I was like, I think 4 years old, so the concept of a stealth game didn't quite hit. It's not that I don't like these games, it's just that they weren't really my thing because I was raised on other stuff like StarCraft and BioShock. I was a Nintendo and PC kid growing up, and the Metal Gear games are usually on the PlayStation. Now that being said, I understand that MGS5 is a departure from the other Metal Gear Solid games, and that there may or may not have been some development weirdness going on outside of the usual Konami stuff. I don't know for certain. I did not actively follow this, and I have not seen any first-hand accounts, and therefore I can't comment definitively on that matter. That's for someone else that is much more versed in the series and the history of the games. That being said, if you were to tell me that Hideo Kojima was secretly several children in a trench coat trying to develop games based on the plot elements of MGS5 alone, I'd believe you. Let's start with the premise. The big boss is a cool dude that used to work for the USA, but he was so cool he went and made his own army just for him. They even had their own nuclear arsenal. Okay, cool setup, but how did the events of the game start? Well, you see, a nuclear weapons inspector came in. It was actually the bad guys that ambushed them, and okay, so at the height of the Cold War, where everyone was keeping their atomic bombs, like how they were made and where they were, like a massive secret, just having them ready at all times, and no one's allowed to touch them, there was just random dudes walking around saying, hey, I'm here to read the meter on your ICBM. Let me in, okay? That sounds like something in a Looney Tunes cartoon or something. Alright, moving forward. Snake is now reforming his army in the middle of the ocean, where he has all the helicopter surveillance technology and trained personnel he needs to wage both the combat and logistical sides of war. Okay, pretty cool. I'll buy into that. He pays for all of this by finding diamonds on the ground. Okay then. Like, of course you get cash for doing missions and money just appears in your accounts for other things, but finding just actual goddamn diamonds just laying around in the middle of Afghanistan is a little much. By the way, Snake fills out his army's numbers by kidnapping dudes who all just think he's so cool that they instantaneously learn English and decide to be unwaveringly loyal to him. I get that a lot of MGS is over the top on purpose, but so much of this feels a little silly and an utter contrivance for a gameplay's sake, and frankly, like, a 6-year-old thought of it. Like, someone that doesn't understand how the world works is making the plot of your game. Whatever, this is all beside the point. We are capable of suspending our disbelief and just accepting that these are the rules of this world. If finding diamonds laying around your floating fortress in the middle of the ocean is how a private military pays its bills, that's just how it goes. Something I couldn't suspend my disbelief for is that in order to start playing the game, you gotta get through a 90-minute goddamn intro sequence. I am not kidding. From my initial boot up to being actually able to dick around in the first area of the game, mind you, the tutorial mission at that, it takes about 80 minutes and change to get from clicking through all the crap to, oh hey, this is a game now, I can play. Like that's around, like I think 87 minutes, I think? I'll have to double check recordings. And then if you want to get to the, okay, we're done learning now, please let me play the game as I see fit stage of the game, you know, like the game proper, that's gonna take another hour and change to now we're up to a little over 2 hours and 10 minutes to get to playing the game. That is fucking insane! Now, I'm no stranger to long cutscenes. I've played and very much enjoyed the games of the Yakuza series. What makes the MGS5 intro so tedious is that it's not one big cutscene that you can either just skip or walk into a kitchen and get a snack with your headphones still on and still be in the know. It's actually a series of mildly interactive elements that are just a step away from being QTEs, but are not reflective of the actual game in any way. Sure, there are a couple moments where you're given the freedom to move around a room and shoot at things, but in a move that's even more frustrating than just making this an out-and-out walking simulator or some walkie-talkie crap, the game takes away control from you right as you're about to have the opportunity to do something cool. What if I wanted to shoot the fire sprinklers and make the Human Torch dude run away? Huh, game? I'm talking about this not just to bitch and moan, but because this is the first strike against Metal Gear Solid 5 not being an immersive sim. The game does not like it when you try to do your own thing. And if that means potentially having an alternate story based on your actions, even in the most minor of sense, the game is not above taking away the player's agency to make sure that things go down exactly as they want them to go. But doesn't Human Revolution do the same thing in the beginning? Well, yes and no. You are on rails for a minute there. Okay, about 10 according to recordings. But as soon as you key in 0451 and whoop out your assault rifle, you're in the tutorial proper, and then for 5 minutes of figuring out how the game's combat work, you get into the intro credits and start the game proper at 18 minutes or so. So that's 10 minutes of intro, and then at 18 minutes in, you're playing the game, compared to a 90-minute intro, and at about 2 hours and 10 minutes, you're actually playing the game. You know, I would have looked the other way and not even written this if the sequence had lasted like 10, 20, or maybe even 30 minutes, but no. It is a literal feature-length intro, which at times is frankly repetitive and overindulgent. Like we see certain scenes with like innocent people in the hospital getting attacked like several times in a row where it's almost an identical scene. Like this is some Tommy Wiseau shit. And finally, about my thoughts on the game outside of discerning if it's an immersive sim or not, I may as well speak my truth because the Metal Gear hardliners are probably already a little upset at me and openly shout at the top of my lungs that the Emperor is wearing no clothes. Metal Gear Solid 5 feels like it's essentially an Assassin's Creed game with assault rifles, and I will back this up. First off, the game has laughably bad stealth, like an early to mid 2010s Assassin's Creed game level of stealth. Patrols have comically small cones of view, ignore everything short of an actual bomb going off or unsuppressed rifle fire, and part of me wonders if they even have object permanence. Sneaking in the Phantom Pain was less about making sure you found a clear path to your thing and that you had plenty of places to block your line of sight to the patrols, and making sure that you've synced up with those patrols so that you have enough time to get where you need to go and enough time to do the thing you need to do, all while not being seen by the baddies that are actively on the lookout for you, and more along the lines of hold the crouch button as you walk literally anywhere except for directly in front of the baddies and you'll be fine, kiddo. If you crouch in a bush, you are effectively invisible. Even then, if you're caught, the whole world goes into slow motion for 10 seconds or so, and you can just shoot whoever saw you, or just drop to the ground because they can't see you anymore if you do that. But hell, I wouldn't be surprised if your typical Metal Gear Solid 5 bad guy would lose track of me if I started playing the peekaboo game with them. And while not exclusively an Assassin's Creed thing, something else that very much gave me the vibe of this being an Assassin's Creed style game is that everyone instantly thinks Snake is the coolest dude ever, even if they were literally trying to kill him moments ago. Now I get this is baked into the story that between the time of Snake Eater's Ground Zeroes and now, Snake has built up a reputation for himself as a legendary soldier that can do pretty pretty much anything, and being a variable one-man army at that. But in spite of all this, he's gonna run around picking flowers and stuff for the diamond dogs to like break even. That's right, there are a million little pointless collectibles that you need to find in order to keep Mother Base running and being able to buy upgrades. Stuff like flowers, little boxes of stuff, big boxes of stuff, cars, mech walkers, dudes, animals. There are a million little things out there, and never mind your personal war in your old organization, you must collect all of that. Part of your intelligence department's job is literally to tell you where the herbs are in an area so you can collect them up, because apparently we just can't order shit or have an acquisitions department. It's not like collectathon games where each thing is placed in a fun area where you find it, like half the challenge is finding the thing, but it's more like, oh yeah, there's gonna be some stuff here, collect it, it's gonna respawn, collect it again, you know the drill. This is very much in the vein of like those Assassin's Creed games or other pointless open world games where a ton of little things are scattered around the map to fill out the oversized game world, and it really feels like it has no reason to be as big as it is aside from bragging rights to put on like some sort of advertisement blurb of like our huge game worlds. And what else are you gonna do with all this pointless open space except scatter a crap load of collectibles about it? Obviously, there are ways to passively gain resources as Mother Base grows, including building structures that generate or refine resources, or sending dudes you've balloon kidnapped on missions that reward you with stuff you need, which just reminds me more of, say, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, where you did exactly that with all the ships you captured. So now you have to stop your aimless wandering around the world collecting every pointless little thing to micromanage like sorties that your other guys are gonna do to collect more things so that you have enough things to get the upgrade for your base that lets you get the other thing that lets you start this horrible pain torment vortex all over again. It's just an endless cycle of collecting a dozen different resources if you want to do literally anything aside from having the default gear. Where in hell? Okay, I've given my loose thoughts on the game, or more like insane ramblings, so let's start lining things up to see if Metal Gear Solid 5 is an immersive sim. We'll start with all the superficial things that are known to be found in immersive sims, but not things that necessarily make games an immersive sim. Let's start with that first code you see in every other game that calls itself an ImSim. 0451. Is it in Metal Gear Solid 5? Nope, not that I was able to find. That's not much of a dig against it though, as a lot of more recent games going the ImSim way are leaving 0451 out or even subverting your expectations. Okay, very cute. Okay, so that's one point in the not an ImSim category, but this is a superficial thing. The next staple of immersive sims, which while still a somewhat superficial thing is also a bit of a gameplay thing, is the act of stacking boxes. Usually done to bypass obstacles, but also done to utterly break the game and see what you can really do with some unintended elevation. You cannot stack boxes in Metal Gear Solid 5 as far as I can tell. This is both for on your own power or using anything in the game world, as it would appear that despite being a legendary soldier that many of these random people think is like a god among men, Snake is not forklift certified. However, you can send large boxes to God for his judgment. Box hell is real, and I will not elaborate on that. To expand on this a little more, it's not just the letter of the superficial thing, but the spirit of the superficial thing too. While there are a lot of surfaces you can mantle or climb up, they're only in places where it's very specifically intended for you to do so. Stacking boxes is all about making your own path where the devs didn't initially intend for you to do so. You want to scramble up the face of a cliff in Metal Gear Solid 5? You better go find a crack in the wall where the devs explicitly intended you to be able to scramble up the cliff. Want to get to the roof of the building or a high vantage point? Go find a ladder or conveniently placed pipe. Lastly, for superficial elements of an immersive sim, we've got the hacking and lockpicking minigames. Again, this isn't something every immersive sim has. Heck, the original Deus Ex just had you expend lockpicks at a rate based on your skill, but MGS5 does not have any hacking or lockpicking minigames. It does have lockpicking, but that's just like pushing a button and waiting for 5 seconds while Snake jimmies a lock. Now, this isn't exactly something I'm bummed isn't in the game. If anything, hackpicking and lockpicking minigames can be something that are tedious and frankly annoying. It's more about the idea of how many ways can you get into this room? An exercise which is pretty helpful in defining what an immersive sim is. In that respect, there isn't really a lot of variety on how Snake can gain access to a place aside from sneaking in along paths you were clearly intended to take or just gunning everyone down. But we're starting to wander into gameplay elements here. Screw it, let's go to the meat and potatoes gameplay. First off, we've got the stealth versus combat dichotomy. Yep, Metal Gear Solid 5 allows you to choose if you want to sneak into a room or just shoot up the place. Like with some games that do this, they'll get upset if you choose violence too often and will scold you for being a bad person. Metal Gear Solid has been doing that for a while though, so if anything, games like Dishonored are taking a page out of its book instead of the other way around. As I understand it, MGS5 is one of the only mainline games in the series that lets you really get into the thick of combat, as for this time, Snake isn't dropped into hostile territory on his own, but has a whole army behind him. It can even bring backup to fights, including but not limited to a dog, a horse, a scantily clad woman, and a literal goddamn tank if he chooses so. So yeah, you can sneak around even if the stealth is very skin deep at best, or you can choose violence. Big, explodey violence. But I pulled the fast one on you. Plenty of games let you choose stealth or violence, but they aren't really immersive sims, and that's because immersive sim gameplay doesn't need an A-B choice, but a variety of means to clear an area. Stuff like being able to disable enemy security systems so that even if you do get caught, the bad guys can't call for help. Setting traps so that you can just spring them all at once and take the base out in a single fell swoop. Or if you're feeling spicy, do some tangential story stuff like learning the kill phrase of the head bad guy or preemptively clearing an area so that when it comes time for you to sneak in, you technically ghosted it anyway because anyone who was able to spot you is dead. And believe it or not, in almost all aspects except those last couple ones there, MGS5 succeeds in this. You can indeed take out radio comms so that if you choose to go loud, the enemy can't send reinforcements. Blow up their air radar so that you can call in a helicopter right on top of you and make a quick escape. Use your balloon things to steal all their gun emplacements so that when the baddies go to their battle stations, they've got nothing to shoot at you with. There's also the staple of sneaking up to a guy or pulling your gun on them at point blank range to get them to surrender and then interrogate him to find out where VIPs are or the location of his other buddies or other important stuff. The only downside to this is that most bases are going to reset once you leave an area, so you can't really do the subterfuge methods like you do in say Deus Ex or Prey, but you know what? I'm gonna give this one to MGS5, but just barely. Then we've got character upgrades and other upgrades, which is Mother Base. That's your not an oil rig you go back to between missions. You can indeed upgrade Snake himself by getting him a better robot arm with better equipables and get nicer guns and tools and what have you, and the same goes for Mother Base. Build more things to do more stuff with those things. This seems like it's clearing the hurdle at first with this stuff, like being able to research the sonar scanner for Snake's arm, but it fails the spirit of the gameplay element, which is slotting into upgrades in order to build your character into a specific playstyle. You can't really do that in the Phantom Pain. Sure, you can try to research things that are helpful for how you want to play, but at the end of the day, you're gonna hit a wall on that research and have to spend your money on something else for a while until you get enough guys to get into the right department. And there's no speccing into movement abilities or stuff like remote hacking in other games that are immersive sims. The most you can really do is, do you want the sniper rifle with a silencer that kills people outright, or do you want the one that fires tranq darts? And for that, this goes into the not really an immersive sim category. Another gameplay element tangentially related to this is having a suite of traditional combat abilities and then a suite of magic or magic adjacent abilities. Obviously, Snake cannot shoot fireballs or use a psychic blast to brainwash all the dudes in an outpost, so that's a no. Yes, I am aware that the arm can come off and be a little rocket arm, but that's a gimmick. That's not like a bread and butter ability, like say the psycho abilities of Prey are bread and butter abilities. Come to think of it, this is actually a pretty big part of an immersive sim, which is to have two completely sets of abilities, one traditional, one fantastical. Whether that be the psionic stuff or cybernetic enhancements, it's always important in most immersive sims that on top of all the normal stuff you can spec into fantastical stuff that lends to creativity in the game. No, waddling around inside of a box does not count. Okay, one last gameplay element. Story-driven missions. That's a pretty easy one for the outset until you really look at Phantom Pain's missions. In a typical immersive sim, every level will have a mission that directly caters to the story and follows a plot line that gets you to the next major hub world. You are here because you need to do the thing to learn the thing to do the next thing. When I say it like that, it sounds like any game might be an immersive sim until we emphasize story-driven missions. MGS5 has an insane amount of busy work missions and things that are both labeled as story missions and side missions. And a lot of these don't advance the plot in a meaningful way. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite effect, where you do a mission and suddenly through the course of this mission, it becomes relevant to the plot after the fact. Almost like when they were in development, they went, oh right, we need to advance the plot, make this plot relevant, and just throw something in at the very end that's not really related to what you were initially doing. It's usually those XOF guys showing up to ambush you. Every mission in Metal Gear Solid 5 has the opening credits like it was some kind of TV show, and frankly, a lot of these are filler episodes. JC Denton didn't fart around in New York for 3 weeks before waiting for the plot to happen. He was actively chasing down where the ambrosia was hidden until he got to the next major revelation in the story. Perhaps this is more an incidental thing that came about due to most ImSims being expensive passion projects that don't have a lot of room for fluffy gameplay, and perhaps that's a good way of putting it. Most immersive sims do not have the luxury of having a lot of fluff missions, and frankly, MGS5 is a stinking Alaskan Malamute of fluff missions. It's got some OG Bleach anime levels of filler in it. Sure, there are side quests in most immersive sims, but those are one-off things that have their own plot arcs which have a beginning, middle, and end. Whereas side ops in the Phantom Pain are go over to this area and shoot a thing. It will help the area. And as soon as you exit that area after doing the thing, you will get notified that an identical side op mission is available now in almost the exact same spot. That's definitely one for not being an immersive sim. Time to get into that high concept stuff. We talked about open-ended gameplay a bit before when we talked about ways to go about your task, but here we'll get more into it now. Open-ended gameplay is when so long as the task gets done, the game is fine with it. This can be using a Nerf gun to hit a button or throwing a crate from a rooftop to take out a guy in the courtyard. Something that the devs didn't really think about when making the level and the objectives, but hey, you got the job done, so it counts. Metal Gear Solid 5 does not have open-ended gameplay when it comes to missions in the story itself. Yes, there is variety, but it's still all along set paths the developers intended you to take. Remember that having multiple ways to do a thing, and the thing being an open-ended goal, are two different ideas. I can't find a way to blow up the giant walker when I first encounter it. I can't win a mission by clearing the base before the mission takes place, and the mission just resets all the dudes at the start anyway. I can't make a fortune by stealing all the weapons and other ordnance of the bad guys I take out to sell them for cash, circumventing the need to do all those side missions. This circles back to that feature-length intro. The game takes away controls from you whenever they wanted a certain story beat to happen in a certain way. I'm not going to get too into specific examples, as I realize even though this is a 7-year-old game, some people will still be upset at spoilers, and I'm trying to go as light on plot details as possible because we're not analyzing the game as a whole right now. We're trying to see if it's an immersive sim or not. And in this instance, in this element, that's a very hard no. Now, something that goes hand in hand with open-ended gameplay is kitchen sink design. I'll be brief here and say that that's another big fat no, because like we were just talking about, Kojima doesn't seem to like it when the player goes off the intended path, at least for the Phantom Pain. I know the Phantom Pain alone isn't a good benchmark for Metal Gear and Kojima's work, but Metal Gear Solid 5 feels like a highly detailed and thrilling dark ride that likes to give you the illusion of going off the path sometimes in the open world, but it's not a playground like most immersive sims are. Immersive sims are a playground in how they've got a bit more structure than a sandbox, but are still open concept enough to allow the player to make their own fun and plan for things to happening. And if anything, the fixtures on the playground facilitate more fun things than a sandbox would. Kitchen sink design, in case you're new to the term, means that the devs metaphorically threw in the kitchen sink when making the game, and thought of nearly everything that they could have possibly encountered in their game. Eidos Montreal sets up a scenario for if the player decides to ignore all the weird glitches their bodies having and not get the update in Deus Ex Human Revolution. Looking Glass and Irrational planned for if Goggles does go into the room Shodan specifically tells them not to go into. Control Alt Ego has a dialogue line for if the player somehow manages to ego jack the parasite virus in the first third of the game. MGS5 doesn't do that because they don't let the player really get unorthodox with things. Everything must happen along certain beats, and you're either going to be sneaking or you're going to be shooting, and the game will judge you for that and that alone. Lastly, let's talk about making your own fun in that playground. That's a very much ImSim thing, as half the fun of immersive sims is doing ridiculous things like glue gun abuse in Typhon or excessive kicking in Dark Messiah. Metal Gear Solid 5 doesn't exactly have the kind of zaniness associated with something like Cruelty Squad or Dark Messiah, but you can have a little bit of unsupervised fun when you're not in a mission. This is less along the lines of exploiting abilities and gameplay elements, and more along the lines of stealing trucks, dicking around in Mother Base, or trying to fistfight a bear. Come to think of it, at least on the smallest level, this one one is kind of hard not to achieve, since with enough determination you can make your own fun in just about anything. So while it doesn't reach the levels of Chaos and Dishonored or I Divine Cybermancy, you can still get a little bit creative in the Phantom Pain. This one goes into the kind of category, which now exists. Before the final verdict, we have a few things to go over that aren't necessarily things that are a certain criteria item for an immersive sim, but rather things MGS5 does that are inherently un-immersive sim. First and most egregious is endless grinding. I didn't need to spend 15 hours blasting the cult girl in the morning on Deathloop to have enough infusion to take on the other guys later in the day. And I didn't need to spend literal days of my life in Cruelty Squad farming the mall mission to get enough cash I need to take on the HQ mission. I is an exception. That whole game is an exception. I still cannot break the cycles of guilt. I have a bit of a confession to make. I did not finish Metal Gear Solid 5 in this playthrough related to the video. I got about 30 hours in, I saw that I was nowhere near done, and that I had dozens of clips that were all nearly identical to each other over the course of all those hours, and I just tapped out. I'll probably come back and finish the game at a later date, like say once I'm done with all the videos for Halloween in July and I can just chill. But I won't be recording it all since I only have so much hard drive space. I think 30 hours was more than enough to figure out if MGS5 was an immersive sim or not. And it's not even open-ended stuff like you're doing in say Kenshi or one of the more lenient Elder Scrolls games. It's just endless grinding of side ops and FOB missions to unlock enough money and resources for the next thing. And after a while, I was starting to feel like this is a 20 to 30 hour game using grind to try and pretend it was an 80 to 100 hour game. I don't know what the big idea was here, but I was half expecting the game to offer to let me buy a premium subscription or an XP boost, because after a while this shit really started to feel like it was a free-to-play MMO that uses like time gating and grind to keep the player hooked. Now we've talked about this in one way or another a couple times now, but let's get to the heart of the issue. Forcing certain situations is very un-immersive sim. You can't slip through that one pass with the ruins in it and elude quiet, or even possibly get the drop on her. You have to have that sniper duel. I can't ghost my way through that one base in Afghanistan and maybe have a different ending to getting Huey where I slip by the big mean robot without having to like run away from it in one of the most annoying segments ever. I have to get caught and I have to run away from it so we can do that big set piece that took so many development and man hours to make. These aren't things that are impossible to account for. Like that example of having a much different scenario in Deus Ex Human Revolution, where if you don't get the new software for your augments at a certain point, or being able to straight up destroy the Nightmare and Prey as soon as you encounter it, negating the need to do that side quest. If anything, this is less about kitchen sink design and more about having faith in the player's abilities and being willing to reward them for extraordinary feats. What if I did bring enough hardware to knock down Salamprothis during my first encounter with it and not need to do that whole set piece? What if I could kill all the jumpy boys early on? I guess if we want to spin this into a positive, it would be that immersive sims have faith in their players, which unfortunately MGS5 does not. Finally, on rather unimmersive sim things, I don't remember having to build my fortress in I Divine Cybermancy or Weird West. The entire element of Mother Base just feels like a huge time sink because you have to wait for literal hours for parts of it to get built, and then when they do get built, they're just a thing that makes the number go up more, and maybe a couple mini games if you walk around the new platform. There's also the exercise and making me not get to the good stuff for 15 minutes at a time by making me run around the base to increase troop morale, or eventually figuring out it's more efficient to just use sonar to punch the ground and get everyone's attention at once. I'm well aware that Mother Base becomes a big plot point in the late game, and I know you need to wander around it a bit for story stuff, but I feel like this could have been something that you just spend mission points or some sort of skill point analog on to increase the things instead of needing to farm resources for hours on end we probably could have skipped FOBs entirely, and this game would have been better off for it. Back to that whole this is a 20 to 30 hour game pretending to be an 80 to 100 hour game idea. Now of course this is very unimmersive sim, but it isn't something that's never found in an ImSim. Hell, Deus Ex Mankind Divided had an entire game mode of pointless grind, but at least they had the dignity to make breach mode entirely separate from the main game. Okay, let's wrap her up. If it's one thing we can take away from this video, it's that it's a fool's errand to try and quantify exactly what is an immersive sim, or the specific elements that make something an immersive sim. A game can have some ImSim elements in it, but not be one, in the same way that a Chili's can have steaks on its menu, but not be considered a steakhouse. However, by committing to this bit, we found that it is a much more doable thing to figure out what isn't an element of an immersive sim. And I don't think I need to show you this chart to tell you that, yeah, Metal Gear Solid 5 is not an immersive sim. It's not even close. I know that some of you are going to be like, nuh-uh, and bring up some contrivance I didn't talk about or just outright disagree with my findings because of whatever. And you know, that's fine. That is your right to do so. However, as far as I am concerned, MGS5 is not an immersive sim, period. We went through the superficial calling cards, the gameplay elements, and the design philosophy part by part, and found that the vast majority of the elements that we could talk about did not line up. And if anything, there were certain factors that went against the design philosophies and ideas and elements of an immersive sim. I'm glad we were able to do this video, because now people will finally stop asking for my take on this, because we've done it. It's out there. We don't need to talk about this anymore. But on a more serious note, I wasn't in a very good place last April and missed doing the April Fool's video. I love doing silly little videos like these, and I'm glad you took the time to watch them. Be sure to like the video to get me out of algorithm hell, and subscribe if you wanna, cause I got all sorts of cool stuff coming up. And remember, it's your right to tell me if you agree or disagree in the comments. This isn't just some sort of agreement chamber. So let's do that end spiel. Remember that no matter what you do, be it dressing up in painstakingly accurate depictions of fictional characters for a convention, filming yourself restoring old things to like new quality, high concept memes that take hours in Photoshop, or whatever it is, you make art. You do not make content. Content is a farce of an idea that's meant to demean what you do into a gray, tasteless slop meant to satisfy an analytics spreadsheet more than it does someone's self-actualization. And it is a tool of the executive who sees your life and all its aspirations as nothing more as one of the many means to make the line go up. I know what I'm talking about here is a little hard in a certain sense. You probably don't think of the word content like that because, frankly, it's gotten so pervasive that you don't even notice that it was essentially brought into its current parlance to generify people's passions into marketable, well, content. But remember, your art has your intentions, your passions, your lifetime of experiences, and it is inalienably a reflection of you by the nature of its creation, and we're fighting for. So fight against content and fight for your art. Stay saucy, everyone.
Saucy boy, are you having an issue? Oh, wait, I saw it through the front. I saw those paws through the front. Oh my goodness. This... This is the greatest thing ever. It's like you've got your sauce box, you've got the well-picked berries box, which we've had for a long time, but I think this is the keeper too. Is this your power armor? Your chonker armor? Oh my god. Are you gonna be okay getting out of this? We have locomotion. Oh, his head's sticking out. Dude, his chonks are sticking out of the sides with his tail. Oh my goodness gracious. I'm gonna try and get a scritch. Scritchy scritch. Oh my god. Oh, look, he got out. The crisis is averted. You know what? I am going to present the temptation. It's there for whenever you want it, Frisk. Oh my god. Are you really?